Do you have a favorite genre? You must see every type, going to so many.
Yeah, this is a pretty common question, and it's kind of easy. Yeah. If you've seen a lot, then it tends to be easy what you tend to go back to and favor more. I kind of like, if you want to be more specific, I like hard science fiction, which is, it's not as common. We've got stuff like, and by hard I mean like stuff like, you know, like Denis Villeneuve, when he's done like stuff like Arrival, Alex Garland's work with stuff like Ex Machina and Annihilation is just great, like perfectly sophisticated sci-fi. We don't see as much of it though, because it's fairly expensive and not as many people go to see it. So I was going to say a particular type, but I really kind of dig just about all kinds of horror. Horror films are, especially great right now. We got tons of different options. We've got throwback horror, we've got classic slasher horror, we've got adventure horror, we've got sophisticated psychological horror with Us. It's everywhere right now.
What did you think of Us?
I love it. I think well, for one, it proved that Jordan Peele's not one note, that he can do more than just like, you know, the kind of Twilight Zone-ish like racial allegory. Here he can actually do more. He can actually weave in like more social messages, but also do it more cleverly. Like it's more subtle. It's not like when you think about like Get Out, it's pretty clear by the end what this allegory is leading to. Whereas with Us, you really do have to like take like you have to like finally dissect this thing to like pick out every little thing in it, like the idea of duplicates, you know, the Jeremiah 11:11, the loss of individuality, the kind of like the placation of nostalgia that plays into it all. So yeah, I love it, and I cannot wait to go back and watch this film again. You're already seeing people who are going through with a fine-tooth comb trying to dissect this thing. So I think it's kind of going to be like this decade's version of The Shining, where we keep coming up with weird conspiracies and theories about it. I've already seen some pretty out there theories about this thing too that are like way too gonzo and crazy, but I appreciate that. I appreciate that people are thinking about horror more in that aspect. So the one thing that I just can't stand, that when people are writing about, they say like oh, Us has saved horror. Like, where have you been? Horror's been pretty damn good for the past couple of years. We've got cool stuff like Hereditary. We got like a pretty damn good Halloween. People seem to really dig it. We got really cool small stuff like the Babadook and cool anthologies like VHS and the anthology, the ABCs of Death and VHS. So there's tons of great horror out there. It's just that now that one's become a big box office success, you know, everyone's just kind of noticing it. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that Us is a huge success, because now people are going to maybe start looking for these other horror films that are kind of smaller, because they really deserve it. So yeah, I love Us. I like being able to see them on the big screen. I like being able to see them with the crowd too, because they're really fun. Because you really, like, that's the best thing you could recommend about going to the theaters, is like watching it with a crowd. Like A Quiet Place is great to watch because the sound will dip out completely and you can just hear everyone's reaction in the theater. The other thing to do is you can also kind of like gauge certain reactions. Like the most hilarious interaction that I've seen in a movie has been, well, there's one good, there's one bad. The bad one was when I was at Bohemian Rhapsody, and we got to the part of the film where Freddie Mercury starts kissing his manager, and we heard this old guy behind us who is kind of like groaning. He's kind of going like, oh God, oh no, Freddie. It's like, did he not know that Freddie Mercury was bisexual? I was trying to think, like, well, did he not know this coming into it? Because, like, before the film started, we got, like, the little boilerplate from the marketing exec saying, like, hey, don't put spoilers in your reviews. And, like, it's the Queen movie. Is this what he's talking about? To not talk about, like, the spoiler, like, okay, spoiler alert, you know, Freddie Mercury kisses dudes. So, well, the biggest, like, criticism that like I have of Bohemian Rhapsody is like the film is 2.5 hours and it feels like it's only going through bullet points of Queen. Like here's what happened with Freddie Mercury, here's what happened with Queen, but we're not going to linger on it too long. We're going to just quickly get to it so we can get to the next song that we got to put in here. And because they do that, like I found the film really scattershot, and the more that I look at it, and I've talked with a few other people about this, is because it doesn't really address much of like, you know, his inner feelings about like being bisexual and stuff like that. It treats it you know, as like when they show him kind of like, you know, ramping down with like, you know, when leading up to his AIDS diagnosis, it almost makes his bisexuality seem like you know, like his downfall, like it was like the vice that killed him, which creates like a really nasty taste in your mouth. But and I'm sure it wasn't intended that way, but man, does it come off like that when you say like nothing about it and just like quickly just get to the next Queen song, instead of actually. I almost would prefer like I wish it were more like kind of like, you know, how they did like Steve Jobs, where they always, you know, talk about the concert and the music, but it's more about the person, and then they don't actually show the music or the concert. Yeah. But it's called the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, so they just show Bohemian Rhapsody there. So that one guy was kind of like, and I have no doubt that guy thought it too, like, oh, his bisexuality was his downfall. A better example of audience reaction was a few weeks ago we were at the screening of Shazam, and they had that moment that everyone's seen in the trailer where he walks into the gas station, the burglars, they shoot bullets at him, and then he realizes he's indestructible, and I think there was like a 10-year-old kid in the audience who was watching this, and immediately screamed out once the bullets hit him, "He's indestructible! Get him!" It was cute like that. So yeah, I do like that part where we get to review films with like a theater audience there. And then of course there's the problem, like you always will end up getting this, and you gotta weather the storm too if you really want to write about film, is weathering the criticism of the criticism. And there's been tons of times when we've had to weather stuff like that. Like, you might remember there's a time when Suicide Squad came out, and because of the low Rotten Tomatoes score, a bunch of fans decided to get together and make a petition to boycott Rotten Tomatoes in a very like poorly worded, like kind of weird manifesto. And then there have been and then there have been other instances, like, you know, because like Disney has become more like a monopoly. If I give any Disney film like a good review, they think like I'm in the pocket of Disney. Like no joke, I've actually had someone come up to me and they say like, they ask like, oh, what about The Last Jedi? Did you like The Last Jedi? I thought, yeah, it was all right. I felt it got a little muddled, but I felt in terms of its themes, I think it nailed it. And then their reaction was, but you're not paid by Disney? No. Like I don't know what you think we do here. And then once you get in there, they give you a long laundry list of spoiler notes that you're not allowed to talk about. Sometimes they're a little bit more cordial, like with Blade Runner, we got like a kind of a personal one from Denis Villeneuve. I don't know if he personally wrote this spoiler sheet or whatever, but whatever. And then other times they'll give you just a fairly big list too. And I try to keep that in mind. Like most films, they pretty much say, yeah, push off the spoilers. Even when Disney doesn't hide it as much, it's like, just ease off it. And sometimes it can be tricky. Like I think with like Last Jedi, I made like two or three notes in my notebook about like how many spoilers not to reveal. So it can get a little bit tricky, but I like that aspect because then it forces me to kind of to restructure like how I write reviews too. Because like I don't try to write I don't try to write like, you know, like plot synopsis and stuff like that. Anyone can do that. You can go to like Commonplace Media or someplace like that can nail that down. Reviews are meant to gain like a better perspective and to think that like maybe there is something else in this film that I might like, but also the other thing I like to keep in mind is like when like with Roger Ebert said about when you write reviews is to always kind of write reviews like to give the film its day in court. You can't just, you know, it's like the difference between like most professional reviewers and like, you know, amateur reviewers. Like a professional reviewer will explain like, you know, what is going on in the story and why it's working or why it's not working. Whereas an amateur one will just like, well, it sucked. And you can't just go, it sucked, because then people just be like, oh, it sucked, but I don't really know why it sucked. So you kind of have to give the film its day in court so that you can write a decent enough review that someone might be able to read it, and even if like they don't agree with you, they can look at your review and say, well, you know what, I might want to see that film, because it'll give you a good idea of what's going on in the film too. The other thing to keep in mind too, like especially when reviewing films, and it's tough to do this too, because like a lot of people get lost in the muck of it, is to always remember that, you know, films are made by people who took time out of their lives to make these films. You know, there are people that, because usually if you know, like, because a lot of people ask like questions like, you know, like, well, what if you actually met this, you know, the director of this terrible film in real life, or this actor in real life? And they say like, would you like to, you know, chastise him for it? Like, nah, not really. Honestly, my response would be, you know, just like, I really didn't like your film, but I can't wait to see what you do next, because you put the effort in, and it didn't quite work, but hey, it might work next time, and then you could really astound me. And I've seen actors and directors who have done it before. Like, I've slogged through a lot of Adam Sandler films, but then he did thankfully, he didn't really kind of like direct or produce one. He did one called what was that? The Meyerowitz Stories on Netflix. And that's probably the best acting I've seen out of him in like a decade. And I was really surprised by it. So I like being able to, you know, to recognize that like there are human beings behind these films, but also recognize that, you know, they can have, you know, they can do more with it. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, with the Disney stuff, yeah. So we have to go through all of that, and then we have to go through embargoes and stuff like that, so there's really not much of an incentive to, you know, for us to be paid. And they'll always mention it too, like, well, you gave a good review because it got paid. Well, please explain to me Beauty and the Beast. And you can, and maybe Dumbo, because I wasn't that big a fan of Dumbo either.
More and more movies are, you get the Marvel Universe, where everything's big flashes and you know, lots of pretty things. And I found myself in a situation where I'm admiring the pretty things work.
Yeah.
There's much talent there with making you convinced this is happening. And then I've also looked at it from the point of view of like, okay, where's the skeleton of, you know, the dialogue, the text, the reason for being. And do you find yourself having to sort of like pull them into two pieces?
Do you mean between like separating between the visuals and between like a script?
Yeah,
you're going through?
The English language better than mine right
I try not to, well, like I try not to like delineate with that. Like I don't come into like a film with like a list of like 8 things that I expect it like to do. That being said, I usually come into a film and ask myself, what is the film trying to do? What is it trying to be, and is it doing it well? Like if it's supposed to be a sci-fi adventure, we're supposed to expect, you know, like Starship, and we're supposed to expect like cool visuals and stuff like that. If it's meant to be a comedy, is it making you laughing? If it's meant to be a romance, is it actually seeming tender and sweet to you? And so like with dialogue, it can be tough, because like dialogue can look decent on the page, and sometimes it can come out like much different from the actors. Like you can think like you have like a really good script that was written, but depending on how it's directed, or depending on how it can be chopped up, it can come out much differently. Now, with that being said, I think that that there are some times where sometimes a script I think just has to be I don't think it has to be like as elegant as it has to be. Sometimes you do have to be expositional. You can find fun stuff to do with exposition, but then that's a kind of a problem though, is like you run the risk of kind of overwhelming the audience to some degree. Like a perfect example of this was when Zack Snyder did Watchmen. He was very much adhering to the story of Watchmen, and he did kind of weave in like the storytelling elements of how Alan Moore's comic book kind of like revealed the world in its own little way there. But I found that when I talked with a lot of other people, they found the film confusing in its non-linear format. Even though the way that it jumps around, it does a great job explaining kind of like the history of how it led up to this kind of like dystopian 1985. So it's I try not to. I mean, yeah, like dialogue can be weak, but but unless it's like a Quentin Tarantino film, I try not to hold the dialogue like too, because if they're clearly not gonna like hold long passages where they have to talk about, where they have to like explain the world and stuff like that, I'm cool if it's just kind of like simple dialogue there, because it could just be like very base dialogue, but they could deliver it tenderly. Perfect example of this is the recent teen drama, 5 Feet Apart. That film has, its dialogue is fairly weak when you consider that the main male lead has to keep on saying the words like, I love you, in the third act. But like he has, I think he says like 5 or 6 times, but he tries to deliver it as best as he can. And I kind of like that aspect too, because then you kind of have to ask yourself, how elegant do you want to make this to be? And you got to realize like, well, these are kind of teenagers, and teenagers probably wouldn't, in the modern age, probably wouldn't speak like Shakespeare. They'd probably be just very base with their emotions. I do find the film a little bit weak, but in terms of that aspect, I tend to take it on its own. Like, as overall, yeah, you tend to bring those into play, but in terms of like visuals and script, they are kind of like their own thing where you have to kind of consider what is going on here with what the film is trying to do.
Oh, yeah. Do you ever watch movies like non-critically, or is it just kind of like automatic, like second nature now?
Somewhat. Like the big thing is like I love just kind of like just watching and writing about them in some degree, whether it is a review or whether it's an essay or stuff like that. With reviews, it's a little bit easier because it's like, you know, whatever the press sheet puts out there. But there are films that I do watch kind of non-critically, like stuff that I might have missed, and stuff that, because that, like with stuff that I might have missed, then I can, you know, find it and kind of like give it kind of a praise where it's due. Like there are a bunch of films I missed, like I missed like Thunder Road. There's a really great anime called In This Corner of the World. And I just, and at that point, I like, instead of just like, you know, eventually I want to get around to writing reviews of them because I really do like those films. But I just kind of like, at that point, I just kind of like just go on Twitter and say like, hey, these guys really made a really cool film, and I'm sorry that I didn't catch up with it later. But yeah, there are dozens of times where I just, you know, I just love going through like Amazon Prime and Netflix. Criterion has a new streaming channel that's coming out soon. They've kind of, there's kind of been a preview up for like those who are Charter subscribers. But yeah, those are like dirt old films, and I love going through every single one of them. So, and I don't usually write about them either. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I see 200 films in the theater a year, but in terms of like films from like all over the decades, like it's somewhere in like 500 or 600 a year, somewhere around there. So yeah, that's 200 just like the stuff I review, and everything else is just kind of like all the stuff I take in. So yeah, I never stop watching movies because I got a problem.
You mentioned it having, you know, movies having their day in court. So should they be judged on their merits rather than any controversy that might surround them? Because the movie that comes to mind most recently is Captain Marvel.
Yeah, it can be tough to do that. Like but I think in terms of like you can take it within like its context, but I think like ultimately over like the test of time is whether or not like the film itself works in that degree. Like yeah, the controversy you can address and you can like and I think like well with the controversy I think it plays more into how willing you are to go along with the film and take it with this controversy. Because a lot of what I found is like for people who really don't like who's involved with like the filmmakers and stuff like that, they'll distance themselves. They'll say like, I'm not going to review this film because I really don't like the director, I don't like the producer, I don't want to have any say in that. Because they know that if they watch the film, they're going to go off. They're going to talk about like, you know, how they can't watch the film the same way, how they can't watch it like, you know, on its own merit as opposed to, you know, the controversy surrounding it. That being said, I do try to take the films as they are, because like most of the time when I find like with like the controversy with like, you know, with like the 2016 Ghostbusters and then Captain Marvel, that's kind of more from like a social media kind of like advertising push perspective. And advertising can be all over the place. Like trailers, you know, a lot of times directors have no control over trailers. And yeah, like advertising can just go nutty. And that's the problem too, is like you do have like where if you do like at social media, you do get like nasty taste in your mouth from like some of the people involved. Like I really did love Paul Schrader for what he did with First Reformed last year, but then he came out and said like, I still want to work with Kevin Spacey, even after all the creepy shit he did. I'm like, I don't know, Paul, I don't know if you want to do that. And then there are certain things that are a little bit controversial, like with, I'm blanking on his name here. The Roman director, Alfonso Cuarón, came out with a little bit of a controversial statement about autism that kind of really pushed me the wrong way. That being said, though, I do kind of try to, like in those cases, I think those are instances where, you know, the directors can kind of like, you know, learn from that. They can take in the perspective as they go. A good example, like with James Gunn. James Gunn keeps saying like, I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly trying to, you know, to better myself through there. And I think that's ultimately what led to him being taken back on for Guardians of the Galaxy was because, well, first off, he handled it with such grace. You know, when he was let go, you know, he could have gone on an angry rant because there were plenty of people doing that for him. So they're just kind of like, well, you know, I put my heart and soul in the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I really love what I did with the script. But if Disney wants to let me go, then, you know, that's their call. I'll find something else to do. And he did. He went up and he's going to do a Suicide Squad movie. And then eventually, you know, Marvel, Disney, they took it in and they eventually realized, oh, maybe we should bring it back. So, and he handled it great, because he could have gone off the rails. He could have said, like, you know, oh, Disney's trying to censor me. Well, screw them, they can all go to hell, and just went over to DC. But now he didn't, and now he's making films for both DC and Marvel. So
He handled it in the best possible way.
he did. He really handled that with grace. That's exactly the way you should handle it.
I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
With all the things you've been hearing, like, you know, as far back as the 2006 Ghostbusters, and then Last Jedi, and then Captain Marvel, and you have this one friend who incessantly spouts about, like, oh, I went to this movie just because of blah, blah, blah. I'm like, if you're not the movie on itself, you're just judging on its controversy.
And this is the one thing I really hate, is because when a lot of people want to talk about films, most of the time, what they love to do is bitch. And it's like, yeah, if a movie's bad, you like to talk about it, like to get it off your chest. But if you talk to like a lot of critics, you'll find what most of them like to do is they like to talk more about the films they like, more than the bad films. There are even some critics who say, like, I don't want to do a list of like the worst films of the year, either because A, I think it doesn't really do anything, and B, because I'd rather talk about good films. Because like the thing is, like, movie criticism, it's not that lucrative a gig where if you want to do this, you better enjoy it, because there are times when you're gonna have to sit through some bad films, and you're gonna get a little antsy in your seat. It's gonna be tough, but you kind of got to play through it. You kind of just got to realize, like, okay, if the film's bad, well, you know, I'll get my thoughts out, I'll get it out in review, and you know, I'll come to peace with it. And then you can part with it. Like, I could, you know, go off and make it a huge rant about how I feel like the Happy Time Murders is kind of like destroying Jim Henson and kind of destroying Subversion, but I won't. And this mic was busted here. I think all these mics are busted. I'll just get a whole bunch of mics here. There we go, that was better. So yeah, that's the one thing I can't stand, like, and you can kind of see, well, and that, the other thing too is, like, because they just want to bitch about it, where, to the point where I will hear people say, like, oh, I'm done with Marvel. And it's like, okay, you're done with Marvel. Well, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about, oh, by the way, did you see what happened with Captain Marvel? Did you see what's going on in the box office? I thought you didn't want to talk about Marvel. It's like, no, I don't, because I'm done with them. Okay, then why don't we talk about something else? And they'll do this too. They'll do this like Disney films. Like, I'm so done with Disney. Oh, by the way, did you see the trailer for Aladdin? You gotta let this go, guy. Because like that's the thing. Like it's not about like they clearly don't care about film. They just love to bitch. And you find this with like a lot of like critics who are on YouTube now. They've kind of like they've, at least the ones that are in like the culture war, have kind of like come into like talking about movie criticism. Like when Captain Marvel came out, because Brie Larson made those statements, immediately all these like these pop culture like nutty people who are claiming like the SJWs are out to get you started making all these videos. And usually, you know, this usually comes with like a few of them, and I expect like, okay, whatever. But then there were like a few videos that really just pushed me over the edge. There was one person who made a video who's saying like, oh, this is an emergency video. I went to Fandango, and this was like 2 weeks before Captain Marvel came out. I'm looking at the theater, and I can only buy tickets for Captain Marvel. Disney is in the pocket of Captain Marvel. And 12 minutes he went on this rant, where in 9 seconds you could just go to the next week and say, oh my God, they're only playing 5 Feet Apart and Wonder Park that week, because that's the only films that are coming out that week, and that's the only ones you can pre-order tickets for. So there's a 5 Feet Apart conspiracy going on here. What is going on? And it's just like, all these people who have no idea what they're talking about here. Now that being said, like, they don't know what they're talking about with Fandango, but then they'll use the quick like get out of jail free card, say like, well, I'm not a movie critic, but it's like, you're talking about a film, and you're dissecting it from that part. I got news for you, bud, you are a movie critic. If you're talking about a film and you're dissecting it, you're in that camp now. And you can't use it as a get out of jail free card, because you're criticizing here, so that's, just because you're not really getting paid to write about it, put it in a journal, you're still under that microscope. and it drives me nuts too because like it's the same deal, just like they love the bitch. Like I followed one person who I thought was interesting. Like 2 weeks from Captain Marvel coming out, this is like, I hate her statements. It's too political. I'm not going to go see it. 1 week before it comes out. Well, I don't know. Critics are kind of talking about it. Here's some murmurs. I might go see it, but I'm going to go see it the second weekend because I'm not going to give it any money. And then the opening day comes out. I went to go see the film. Why did I go see the film? It was terrible. Why did I go see it? Don't pretend like you don't know why you went to go see it. You went to go see it for content. You went to go see it to get mad, so you could bitch and have content for this stuff like that. Don't put yourself in this box of like, why me? Why did I go to see it? Like even I get into films for free, but I have like dissections where I can say like, I don't want to go to see this particular film. I'm not bound by anything here. You're not bound by anything here. You don't have to go to Marvel. Just because it made $300 million doesn't mean you have to cover it unless you're really that desperate for content where you want to go see it and then suffer through it and then bitch that you had to go pay and watch for it because you're a slave to your content now. Good for you.
I don't see it just because it ties in with the other MCU, and then I'll judge the film like, oh, was it worth it? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I try to do. I try to like see if the movie's worth it just by seeing it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Just curious what you think of, or if you've ever seen like a bad movie, but there's moments in that bad movie. I'm thinking Happy Time Murders, just like a brief scene or two where you're like, you know, this could actually work if they did this, if they did it differently. If like, have you ever had a movie that? I'm trying to think of one. It was a big sci-fi film a couple of years ago. God, what was the name?
There was one that I didn't kind of dig at. It was called like a Valerian?
Yes, Valerian.
Is that the one you're thinking of? Yeah.
Like, it's based on a really good comic. I haven't read the comic, but I flipped through it and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And then you go to the movie and you see like the universe and you're like, this is pretty interesting. Like there are parts of this that work and then there are parts that don't. Like,
Yeah.
do you have like a guilty pleasure movie?
Well, for like guilty pleasures, I guess I could go on the basis of like if there's a particular film that I kind of dug that's not really as well regarded. That's happened tons of times. Speed Racer's kind of become like a cult since when it came out, so I don't think it's too much. I guess the most recent example I can think of is that I really like The Dark Tower, and a lot of people hated The Dark Tower.
I've read the book series like 9 times.
Mm-hmm.
It was my Harry Potter. I haven't seen it yet because I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Like, not because of Idris Elba, because I think I can see Roland in his eyes.
Yeah.
I can see that him playing that character, and I guess a lot of the fans are upset because they didn't include, God, what was his name? Famous cowboy.
Okay.
He's like 80 years old now, though. He was in Newell this year. But they were mad because they were like, this guy should play better than singer. I'm like, no, he's in his 30s. And
Yeah.
And this guy is 80s. In his 80s, he's not going to work. But I haven't seen that movie yet, but the books are excellent.
Well, most people were kind of dogging on it because it's kind of like a middling, like, you know, boy lost in his own like little fantasy world type deal.
Yeah.
And a lot of people found it like too ridiculous or didn't say anything. But like when it got up to the climax and you have an ending where evil Matthew McConaughey as a wizard is shirtless and catching bullets that are fired by Idris Elba's magical gun, which has bullets that can ricochet.
Yes.
While Matthew McConaughey is trying to harvest the screams of children to open a portal in his world. It's like, this is so damn goofy that I really kind of love it. So.
And in the book, it's the way he writes. You look at stuff Stephen King writes and into movies, and they're completely like it's a completely goofy movie. But if you read in the book, like the books just make it. I don't know.
I'm sure it seems more earnest in the book, and the books are like, you know, like huge phone book sized volumes of this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, they're very. I heard that. God, I'm going on my own. I'm going on my own thing.
Okay.
For your panel, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. But yeah, I kind of like the Dark Tower, and that always happens. Like, and for some reason, sometimes it surprises people. I've had people say this too, like, well, why is it like these critics say they didn't like this film, and then these critics say they didn't like it? It's like, well, because we all have thoughts. Like, it's still like a mystery that there's no cabal of us all together where we all gather together and it's like, yes, it's decided. We all like this film. We don't function that way. I was very much middling on Bumblebee, and I think that was like 92% on Rotten Tomatoes too. So yeah, also like that's the other thing too. Like I kind of like, and a lot of people talk about this too. I really don't like how like Rotten Tomatoes is kind of like boiled down like movie criticism to the point of just like where people look at numbers more than words for how they like judge a movie. Because like a lot of times people do this. Like they'll just go on Twitter and they'll just post the Rotten Tomato percentage, and they'll be like, I don't understand why I got this score. And I'm like, well, did you read the reviews? And I hate that like there are certain apps that track Rotten Tomatoes through like their movie ticketing service. And they'll only type like maybe a small excerpt or just like wherever they posted it from and then don't post any of the review. And it's like that completely defeats the point of Rotten Tomatoes. It's meant to be a critic aggregate site. You're meant to like go and find these other reviews and read them to get their perspective on it. But instead we just all look at like the Rotten Tomato percentage, and that's like the number that they look at there.
It's like to look at DVD covers and stuff like that with bad movie reviews, or obviously bad movies.
Yeah.
The quotes taken completely out of context.
Oh yeah, those are beautiful.
Yes.
They used to, well, what they also used to do is they used to find like the one good review and then they post in there, and you notice like whenever they do it, they'd always put the source in like a very, very tiny little text at the bottom there. Like it'd be like AM in Phoenix News or something like that. So yeah, they would become a little bit creative with that. But yeah, I love whenever they put like although I do kind of like when they put because like with some releases they put like the certified fresh Rotten Tomatoes sticker on the packaging, and I love when I can peel it off and then stick it on all my terrible DVDs. So here's my alternative universe where Xanadu is certified fresh.
It's got the same for video game reviewers on there. Some people just like, oh, look at the number, and close for number, it's crap.
Yeah. And that's why the mantra I have like that is just like consider the source. Because a lot of people say like, oh, I heard this one was terrible. It's like, where'd you hear it from? And it's like, like, well, I heard it from like such and such news. Like, well, consider the source. Is it someone like you read regularly, or that you kind of like have similar views with, or that you agree? Which kind of brings me to the other point is that I hate it when they do this. This is like the other thing a lot of these like YouTube critics were saying with stuff like I'm not a movie critic. They'd also say this thing where they say like, I try to review as objectively as possible. I got news for you. There's no such thing as reviewing objectively. You're talking about art here. Films, however much you want to disagree, what Michael Bay does, movies are art. And art is entirely subjective. There's no objective reviewers out there. Even Common Sense Media, which is a site just devoted mostly to just making sure like a film is like okay enough for your kids to watch, even there, if you read their reviews, they're pretty subjective too. There's no like, and I know what they're trying to say. They're trying to say like, I don't want to have like critics who review with kind of like a political bias or something like that. And that usually is code for not my political bias. Because here's some more great information for you. Everyone's biased because they all come into these films from a particular perspective, okay? No one wants to read a review that's not gonna talk about themes or bring in like your personal perspective and bias. No one wants to say, oh, well, the lighting was okay, and the visual effects look decent, but yeah, I guess it was okay. It's like, no one wants to read that. They want to hear about the film. They want to hear about how it makes them feel, because chances are if they just like look at it from like the technical perspective, they're going to come into that film and think, well, I didn't know about these themes and perspectives that are being in play here. Why didn't anyone mention this? It's like, that's the point of reviews, is to get you interested in those. Yeah?
I have been noticing with many of the live action adaptations over the years, the complaint I will usually hear from friends of mine is like, well, they didn't get to this, they didn't get to that. You have to remind them that, like, well, you've been reading 44 books of this, 44 individual books of this,
Yeah.
16 volumes of DVD stuff on this. They can't possibly get it. Because
Yeah.
I'm thinking the production house is going to have $300 million that we're willing to bank on this, which is going to amount to 126 minutes in length.
Yeah.
We got to do it that way because we have to get John Paul public.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say to these people anymore. It's like they didn't get to this, and I'm like, even I heard like.
To them, I would say, did it feel like it was getting towards the source here? Because like a lot of times, yeah, they will have all this material that they're clearly not going to get to, and so the filmmakers are not looking at it from a perspective as a list, which I don't think they should be. Like they look and say, okay, what does this, like, what does this particular property or IP mean to me, and what do I feel like do I want to come out most with it? Because there are tons of examples of like properties where they do diverge heavily from it, and they find something different to take from it. And that's the biggest thing, because yeah, I mean, fans in that regard, yes, they will go down the list saying like, you didn't address this part. Like book adaptations are very much like that, where a lot of people are very analytical. It's like, you didn't get to this character, you didn't show this place, you cut this part out. But I think the important question to ask is like, if you do have that list, to ask, was it really that crucial to the film that it needed to be in there? If it were present, would it add another layer, or would it just be an appeasement of the story? Do you think it would keep the flow, or do you think it would destroy it too? Because a lot of times it's just looking, you know, like that's where, you know, it becomes more like, you know, the antiquated approach of just like, you know, let's go down the list, let's see what it did. And it's like, that's like grading a paper as opposed to, you know, actually like taking in the story and like whether or not it had an impact on you, or whether or not it delivered on the type of feeling that you had. Like Speed Racer, the Wachowski brothers film, it tinkers a lot with the mechanics there. It adds in a lot of dorky stuff, like the little like ejector bubbles and stuff like that. But ultimately, it has that feeling of the craziness of like a Speed Racer episode.
Year or two, and I've shown it to my friends, and most they're like, "Oh, this is hard to get into at first because it doesn't know where it's going." And by the time it gets to the end, like, "Oh wow, I didn't change my mind. It was actually really good. It had its problems." But I still like the message it was trying to convey.
Yeah.
And that's what an adaptation is. You're trying to still retain the essence of the thing,
Mm-hmm.
even if you can't always put it in the same medium. Because, like, for example, 50 years of a comic, how do you compress that into a 2-hour movie?
Yeah.
So, I mean, sometimes you just have to appreciate it for what it is and not nitpick it apart.
Or at least, yeah, like try to see what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
A perfect example of this is last year there were 2 Disney films that I really didn't like. It was kind of like, you know, middling type 2-star range there. Was 2 films called, there was one called A Wrinkle in Time, and there was another one called The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. I felt like they were really and the thing is, they both have great, at least themes and ideas that they want to get across, because their big thing with both these films is they want to have young female protagonists in the lead. And they want them to be very confident, young female protagonists who kind of like build up their confidence through there and want to go on to better things. It's just the way that they present them, it feels more like a PSA, almost kind of like their heart really wasn't in it. And like, cause like by the end of like Wrinkle in Time, I think that because this character went to the edge of the universe and decided not to kill her brother, they compare her on the same level as Rosa Parks and stuff like that. It's like, it didn't quite do too much as Rosa Parks there, but I like the fact that they are bringing in that theme, because I think, because a lot of people see it as like a theme saying like, oh, clearly audiences don't want female protagonists there. But I like the fact that if they want to try this, I think they should keep at it. And I think Disney's in a unique position where they have this much power that they can afford to experiment, that they can afford to kind of go with. Like, it's interesting, like, even though I found like Dumbo kind of like lukewarm and middling, they kind of improved that with the female character here, and I thought it was going to go down the same route, where it's going to kind of stumble, but they actually present a female character who's interested in science, and they do kind of weave it a little bit better into the plot. So I like that. So even though I didn't like those films, I understood what they were trying to do. I appreciated that they were trying for the message, even if they stumbled. And I feel confident, like, you know, looking at the films from that perspective, to say that, look, even though they failed, you know, keep trying at them, because they're going down a good route here. I like what they're trying to do here. Yep.
So in general, how have you been feeling about the Disney live actions versus animation, like the original animated ones? Like, do you typically like the films that have more detail, like in Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, like they added a lot more backstory? Or does it just depend on each specific?
I think ultimately with like the formula I've been seeing, I would almost prefer that Disney kind of like digs through their archive and finds less, and I know they're probably not going to do it now, but I wish they'd find films that didn't have that much like high regard with them, because then you risk that, you know, audiences comparing them. Like I think one of their best live action adaptations was with The Jungle Book, and that's mainly because I wasn't that big a fan of The Jungle Book, and it has quite a bit of flaws, and Jon Favreau was actually able to find interesting and unique stuff to do with it that didn't make you think as much about the film, that they actually took it in like a different way. Like, yeah, they do have the familiar songs, but they put a better twist on there. Like Bill Murray adds a little bit more scat to bare necessities. They actually try to do it, and Christopher Walken sing "I Want to Be Like You" was actually pretty amazing. So that too, and along with that, I would also say Pete's Dragon. Pete's Dragon is deeply flawed, but I love that they made it into a more emotional type of story there. But that's the problem I'm seeing with stuff like Beauty and the Beast and Dumbo, and I'm probably going to see with Aladdin too, is that when you compare them to, like, 'cause most people remember Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and Dumbo, that they're held in high regard, that when they try to duplicate it in live action, you kind of lose something from it here. Like in Beauty and the Beast, like when they have that opening sequence, in the original animated version, it's so amazing to see that sequence. The whole village is bustling and vibrant and energetic, and everyone's singing big. And here in the film, everyone seems a little bit like they're stiff, like they can barely move here. Like everything has to be very finely, tightly choreographed here, where barely anyone can do anything. Even when Emma Watson gets up to the giant hill where she has to run through, saying like, "I want to be in the Great Wide somewhere," she just kind of stands there and doesn't kind of like move around and like enjoy it, like kind of have like this like free-flowing thought to her. It's like even Julie Andrews found something to do when she got up the hill, you know, just move around, do something. But then like it depends, like, yeah, what do you add to it too? Like I appreciated that they were trying with Beauty and the Beast, but then you create kind of like these questions you didn't want to have before. Like, okay, so the Beast has a magical atlas that can take him to anywhere in the world in real time, and you can go visit anywhere. It kind of takes out that kind of loneliness that the Beast had. Like, because I'm sorry, if you can visit anywhere on the planet you want, it kind of doesn't seem as lonely. And then you run the huge risk of like having like the big ass plot hole when it's like, oh, I have to go help my father. Like, wait, but they have the atlas. Like, quickly, go rush to him. But you have the atlas. What were you doing? And it's like you want to whistle that, because then like the nitpickers will come out of the woodwork, and that's a big meaty steak for them to get into, and that's a problem though. It's like, 'cause, yeah, nitpickers I usually don't like, but when they have that big like plain size of a plot hole that they can go right to, you're kind of like, yeah, they kind of got to be right there.
They open themselves up for that.
Yeah, and Dumbo is like the same way. The other thing too I want to mention is that the emotional drive to kind of gets hampered when they try to like rework these works and try to have familiar scenes in there. Like one of the most emotional scenes from the original Dumbo film is when Dumbo's mother is locked up and her trunk comes out of the cage, and she basically kind of like cuddles Dumbo while she's singing "Baby of Mine" while Dumbo breaks into tears. It's one of the most like kind of emotional and sad scenes in the entire film. In Tim Burton's film, he has the same thing, except we don't really have that build up to it, and the Baby Mine song is not as well conceived this time around. And since it's in live action and it's not an animation where Dumbo looks way too small, you can't have like kind of like the cuddling, and you don't have like the kind of like huge big tears, that it really loses something. And you kind of look at that scene and just think like, this worked way better in animation. And I think that's the problem. Like, if Disney wants to go ahead with these live action films, like, and they will as long as they keep making money, I think they need to have enough confidence to diverge from what they've done. They've got to have the confidence to say, like, we don't, like, they can't go down the checklist and say, like, we need this scene, this scene, this scene. Have the balls to say, no, we're going to make it its own film, make it distinct, and not just replicate what we have from animation. Because a lot of these films that they're pulling from, they're already regarded as highly classic, so you're playing with fire here. It's kind of like when someone has said like maybe we should remake Back to the Future, except it'll be in like the 90s. It's like, what for? I mean, not to say that you couldn't make a good film like that, but when you call Back to the Future, you know, you run the risk of like the comparisons there. It's like calling Barbed Wire Casablanca 2000. You're not wrong, but you're playing with fire there. So.